Hi everyone. Our lesson is on water resources. First of all, let's talk about the distribution of the Earth's water. So if you took all of the water in and above the Earth in the atmosphere and you put it together, uh, this marble-sized blue marble that you see here would be all of the water in that. Now, if you took only the fresh water that included surface and groundwater, and put it all together, this middle-sized small blue dot would be how much all of that water would be. Now, if you include only the fresh water in lakes and rivers that you see on the surface, then that would be this tiny dot. So this shows that water is very limited on the surface of the on our Earth, particularly fresh water. A lot of the water that we see is salt water in the ocean. Now let's look at today's weather here. Now today is Monday, May 15th. We have a lot of rainfall coming in Massachusetts. This bluish color here, you see that indicates the rainfall that's been occurring here. You see this low pressure center, this anti-clockwise circulation that's moving off the coast here in the east. That's bringing a lot of this precipitation here, but it's going to be slowly moving away soon. Again, if you look at the satellite image of the water vapor, as you can see all of this water vapor here off the coast of New England here, leaving basically uh, Massachusetts here in the next couple of hours. So we had a lot of rainfall in Mother's Day and including today, which is partly because of all of this water vapor. Now let's talk about water uses. Water is vital for the survival of humans. Um, Three major things that we use water for is agricultural, industry, and our domestic uses. Now we see that in the US, if you look at this map of water use for agriculture, we see that um, in the US, about 49% of the total fresh water is used for agriculture here. However, if you look in now Asia and Africa, so this is the African continent, this is South Asian continents here, you see that a lot of the water, about 85 to 90% of the water is used in agriculture. So more water being used in traditional and subsistence agriculture in these two continents. If you look at the industrial uses of water, we see that the North American countries, US and Canada, along with other European countries, use a lot of water for industry. So again, they are more developed, have more needs for industrial uses of water. And this is the domestic use of water. Now, on average, a person living in, let's say, the US uses about 500 to 800 liters of water per day, compared to about 60 to 150 liters of water per day for someone living in the developing countries. So again, the use of water and how much it is used that differs from country to country. Now, this is how water circulates in the planet. Um, Most of the rainfall that comes down is either in the form of rainfall, it comes as rain, or snowfall. So two major ways the water comes down. That water basically comes down the elevation on hills, meets down the rivers. Most of the water, some of the water comes down as surface runoff. So basically, uh, it sort of comes down on the surface. Most of the water comes down into the ground, seeps into the groundwater, and eventually comes down as groundwater flow and eventually meets the rivers or the ocean. Now, how do we send the water back to the atmosphere? One way is these yellow arrows, evaporation. So when the temperature is warm, the water from the surface, from the oceans, basically evaporates and it goes back into the atmosphere. The trees can also transpire some of the water and send it back to the atmosphere. So again, these two yellow arrows indicate major ways the water goes back to the atmosphere. So again, this cycle continues. Only thing is, humans can certainly impact this cycle. By cutting down trees, by using a lot of this water, and also through climate change, we can change this cycle. And we'll come to that in several couple of lessons from now. Now, it is important. Water is important because in the last couple of years, we've seen really drastic cases of severe drought, particularly in the U.S. California had a really bad drought, as it was bad in almost 1,200 years. And you see these pictures of reservoirs that are really shrunk down low, and was barely enough to provide any drinking water for the neighboring towns. So California had to cut down a lot of their water supply, had to put a lot of restrictions on how water can be used. The U.S. Drought Monitor puts this map every couple of weeks that shows where drought is occurring. Now you can see that this is the scale here. The red and the dark red indicates areas that are in exceptional drought, whereas yellow areas are probably areas that are dry but could develop into drought regions. Now this is from last fall, September 16, 2016, 2015 here. So this is every year after that, before that. As you can see that starting 2013, California started developing this drought that basically persisted for several years. And you can see 2014, 2015 was really bad, including 2016. 2015, we had dry areas extending as far as Pacific Northwest out to Washington and Oregon State. Now this year, earlier this year, we had a lot of rainfall and big snowstorms in California that has replenished a lot of the water supplies here. So how can we increase our water supplies for towns and cities? First thing is we can use groundwater. So groundwater that's underneath the ground can be pumped from aquifers and then send it back to towns and cities. And hopefully that groundwater that you pump up is replenished by rainfall or other nearby water resources. The other one is using dams and reservoirs. So we can build dams, we can build reservoirs, and then transport that water to dry areas as well as towns. And these two methods are used in a lot of these towns here. Even Dudley, right here in Dudley, we have the public water supply that comes to us is pumped from groundwater. So this map here shows the rainfall that falls across the U.S. So the blue areas here indicating areas that get more rainfall. This is very dry here, yellow. And again, west of the Rocky Mountains, we get more rainfall here in the Pacific Northwest and California. Now, if you look at the towns here, these are some of the towns here in this color here that have a population greater than 1 million. So again, we can kind of see where these towns might be getting their water from, where there's a greater need for water. These towns here obviously are in much more drier areas, so need more water supply to be for them to provide to these cities. So places in California and central Arizona, we see that a lot of these rivers have been tapped for with dams, or the water is diverted to supply water to big cities, California, Los Angeles. So as you can see, there's a lot of aqueducts built. We have one of those biggest dam, Hoover Dam, Lake Mead, that supplies water to Arizona, to California. That's coming down from the Colorado River. So again, this area here represents some of these rivers that have where the water is used so much that barely that water actually reaches down to the ocean here. Now we can look at another example here in New York City water supply. If you're living in the Manhattan or in one of those 5 boroughs, you are actually getting your water from about 100 miles north in a place called the Catskill Delaware watershed. So about 100 years ago, this area was protected, and we see all of these reservoirs here that were basically created, and that water is now basically brought to New York City in this tunnel here through gravity. So again, a really marvelous engineering design, but this method is still being used to supply the good quality water that we get in New York City. Now, as you see, one of the ways we could get water supply is to basically pump groundwater and through aquifers, but we see that there's been a depletion of aquifers across the U.S. So these red areas indicate where we've been pumping a lot more groundwater than the water that has been going in. So if you pump more water out and less water is going in, we get a depletion, right? So this dry area here in the west, in the Midwest, is getting really depleted. Now, even locally here in Massachusetts, we've had several really dry spells. This was in 2007. This is in Westboro. A lot of these local streams and rivers were virtually dry that year. Again, this is Gulf Brook in Pepperell, 2007 again. Nothing, basically no water flowing through the whole streams here. Again, this is in Shrewsbury in Mass, Poor Farm Brook, virtually dry. Again, another shot of Gulf Brook Pepperell. And again, these were examples from 2007, Mattapoisett River in 2007. Now, we again had a recent drought spell in Massachusetts in 2016. So there are two graphs here. One shows this precipitation here. So, and if you look at this bottom here line, it goes from about 1950 to 2016. So this data you're looking is from 1950 to 2016. So precipitation here, rainfall. This line here shows the average rainfall that let's say would fall in Massachusetts. So any line that goes above this line is more than average rainfall in Massachusetts, and anything that goes below is less than average. So you see that there's lots of times when there's been less rainfall. So going back to 1965, there was a big drought here. And again, it goes up and down. The last 10 years have been fairly wet, but as you see, it started to decline here. And 2016 here now, we are above this average precipitation. So we had much less rainfall in 2016. Now this is the groundwater level. How much, where was the groundwater level in Massachusetts? And as you can see, when the rainfall is really low, we see that the groundwater level is also goes further down, right? When it's really wet, the groundwater comes fairly high up. And again, in 2016, we see that there was a small decline in the level of groundwater. Prior to that, as I said, over the last 10 years, we've enjoyed fairly wet weather here in Massachusetts, so lots of high groundwater level, lots of precipitation, right? So that's how we can see how things can go into severe drought sometimes, how long they last. So those are all important things. So what are the causes of potential low flow in streams? So basically by low flow, I mean how much water is flowing through streams. Before I go that here, let's take a look at so this is the United States Geological Survey. This keeps track of various monitoring stations in streams. So if I go into Massachusetts here, these are all of the stations that have real-time stream flow. So how much water is flowing through this stream. So again, if you go, let's say, in some of these streams, this one is Little River near Oxford. If I look at the hydrograph, so this is basically a plot that shows how much water is flowing across time. So this is the hydrograph from the last week. So as you can see, this is time here. It's daily. This is cubic feet per second. So this is discharge. What is the volume of water in this particular river? So when you're measuring this, we see that the river was fairly dry in May 13th, but then we had a lot of rainfall the last couple of days. So as you can see, all of the rainfall is coming down and making its way to this stream. So as you can see, this rainfall is picking up. The discharge is picking up, right? So when the stream flow goes really low and stays there for a very long time, that's when we start to get symptoms of drought. And that was the point here. What are the low flow clauses? Couple of things. One of them is increased development. So when you replace a lot of the forest with, let's say, buildings and urban development, and we start paving things, that could cause a lot of low flow. Second thing is if there's increased water demand. So when there's lots of, if the town is growing, if the city is, the population is increasing, there's more demand for water. If there's more infrastructure, there could be more demand for water, more industries. So that means you're drawing more water from the groundwater or from the reservoirs. That's when we could hit low flow, potential low flow in streams. And also the third one, if there's really dry, warm conditions, right? So if you don't get a lot of rainfall, and if the temperatures are really high, let's say over the summer for several weeks, several days, you can have really low flow in these streams. So three main reasons. What are the problems that low flow causes? Now streams, if you don't have a lot of water flowing, you basically reduce the level of oxygen in that water. So if you don't have oxygen, that's detrimental for the animals, for the organisms, for the fish, for the plants in the streams. Decreased dilution potential, which basically means if the water is flowing, if there's a lot of water in the streams, any pollutant could be diluted. So let's say if you if you throw in, let's say, any sort of pollutant that's coming off from the agricultural area, that could be diluted very easily if there's a lot of water. But if there's not enough water, that means these things, pollutants, cannot be diluted. When the water is low, you also have high water temperatures. The water temperature starts increasing, and that's also uh, hazardous to the organisms and then the aquatic flora and fauna. And for instance, in 2007, the streams that dumped into Lake Quinsigamond had really low flow, which meant that Lake Quinsigamond had also less water coming into that lake. So that causes a reduced circulation of that lake. So the water is very stagnant in these lakes and ends up getting polluted as a result. So these are some of the main causes of low stream flow or low water in rivers. Now, what are the major pollution sources of water? Water can be polluted by two main ways. One is called a point source pollution, and the other is called a non-point source pollution. Now, the point source pollution, it's easier to identify and see where things are coming from. So these are basically discharged at specific locations. So for instance, you could look at a sewage treatment plant, right? If your town has a sewage treatment plant, the water is being treated and then it comes out of a pipe and let's say it gets dumped into the stream. So you can actually identify these sources of pollution as points. So they are easier to monitor and identify. A non-point source pollution, as the name suggests, is hard to detect because these are things you cannot see. These are coming from elsewhere. So for instance, let's say on a river, if there are chemicals and sediment that's basically coming off from an agricultural area that's upstream, it's hard to see the source of that pollution. And same with agriculture. It's hard to see the where that agricultural fertilizers were used that's coming down to this particular stream. So as a result, this non-point source pollution can be very difficult to monitor and identify, and also pretty expensive to control. So this gives an idea of the two major water pollution sources. As I mentioned, lake pollution, I gave the example of Lake Quinsigamond. When there's low water coming into the lake, if there's less input of the water, then the lake starts to be stagnant. There's not enough water. Stratification could be caused, and lakes are more vulnerable than streams. Streams are more mobile; they're always flowing. Lakes tend to be more stagnant, so there could be more nutrient pollution problems. And one of the major problems that we see in a lot of lakes and reservoirs in the U.S. is something called eutrophication. Now, eutrophication, it is a natural aging process, but it can actually be fastened. So in the next couple of slides, I explain what these are. So again, this is a schematic diagram of streams. Shows this is a point source pollution here. Let's say a sewer pipe coming through into the stream. Non-point source pollution would be things that would be running off here on the landscape from, let's say, agriculture or other fertilizers that are being applied on the landscape, right? So eutrophication. So this is again two lakes here. One is this fairly clear lake, as you can see, really blue in color. This one here, as you can see, is almost green and has this vegetation growing in the lake. So this is what we call eutrophication. If the lake receives more nutrients from the landscape, let's say if you have an agricultural area here or a sewage treatment that's dumping nutrients and sewer into this lake, the lake has all of these nutrients that the plant utilizes inside the lake to grow. And eventually the plant, when they grow using these nutrients, they use up all of the oxygen, and then this creates this problem called eutrophication. So this is a big problem in the Gulf of Mexico. So here, this is the Mississippi River basin. So as you can see, the Mississippi River is coming down here. This gray area is all of this land here in gray basically eventually drains into this Mississippi River that eventually drains into Gulf of Mexico. So now the problem here was we had all of this agricultural area, fertilizers, nitrogen, and phosphorus that was applied in these agricultural areas that was basically being drained into the Mississippi River and that was being dumped into Gulf of Mexico. Now, as a result, this Gulf of Mexico, there was a high level of nutrients here. So the whole Gulf of Mexico was basically there was high case of eutrophication. As a result, these plants and algae that was growing here depleted the oxygen here in parts of Gulf of Mexico. So when you don't have any oxygen in these rivers and lakes and ocean bodies, you can call that this lake, this water body is biologically dead, that it cannot support any organisms here. So this was a big problem in the Gulf of Mexico, and this is a recurring problem here. So sometimes this is called the dead zone as well. As you can see, these are some of the major areas of concern here all across the world. So again, all along the coastal areas where there is high agricultural activity, you get these areas of concern. So again, main cause is using fertilizers in nitrogen that basically gets dumped in the rivers, that gets dumped into the ocean. This high level of fertilizers cause the growth of algae and phytoplankton that need more oxygen, and basically the use of the oxygen reserve. So as a result, this type of eutrophication disrupts aquatic ecosystems. So again, there's major, this is just one example of nutrient pollution. There are various other major water pollutants. Again, human and animal waste, sewage is a major pollution, particularly in developing countries where there's not a good system for water treatment. Industries, land erosion, again, you can see that what type of pollution that these things are causing. Now, groundwater, the water that's underneath our ground that's being pumped for drinking water can also be polluted. So here we see this groundwater that's being pumped, but let's say if we have waste lagoons or we have accidental spills, or if you have landfill, these are all potential sources of pollution where the water can basically seep down into the ground and basically pollute your groundwater that's being pumped into just residential areas, right? So septic tanks, sewer, wastewater, landfill, pesticides that can also sort of seep down. So again, we have to be very careful where we are drawing our water from, and make sure that the surrounding areas, don't have any potential sites of pollutant sources, because otherwise they can certainly go into these aquifers beneath the ground and pollute these water resources that are being pumped. Again, this is problematic if you pollute your groundwater, because there's a long time scale for cleansing, because it's a very slow way of cleaning that groundwater. It stays there for a long time. So organic matter are degradable, DDT are slowly degradable, and lead, arsenic, fluoride, these are more dangerous and poisonous, and also they are non-degradable waste. So these are some of the things we have to be really, really careful of for groundwater pollution. So last slide is how do we reduce non-point source pollution? Again, as I said, these are mostly consisting of agricultural waste. So farms, animal farms or agricultural farms contribute to this non-point source pollution. One thing we can do is we can use vegetation along streams and the farmland to reduce soil erosion. So less soil is being eroded into the streams, which means that less of the nutrients basically make it way down to the streams. And finally, we can also reduce our fertilizer use in the farms, and that way we can make sure that less of the fertilizer is coming down as well. Now I have a number of slides that I at this point here, and I'll post this up on Moodle. So please feel free to look at some of these slides here after this last slide as well.